everybody, it's Sarah. Welcome back. Today I'm here to do my January wrap-up. And I definitely had a very strong start this year because in January I managed to finish 10 books, and some of those books are actually now some of my favorites of all time, which is always so great, and the others were also pretty amazing. So without any further ado, let's dive into all of those books. So the first book that I read in 2021 was L'Allégorie des truites arc-en-ciel by Marie-Christine Chartier. And this is basically an adult contemporary romance in which we follow our two main characters who have been friends for a very long time, but they actually have romantic feelings for one another. They just never really talked about it. And this book was very cute and entertaining. I actually read it in one day on January 1st, so that's a fun fact. I didn't really get that attached to the two main characters or their relationship. I feel like it was lacking a little bit of depth for me, and normally like when I don't get that attached to the main characters or when I'm not like that interested into the relationship in a romance, well, the book doesn't really have a point for me because that's basically like the whole premise of the story, is that they're falling in love. I also thought sometimes that the writing was just not really for me. Like the style was very simplistic, and some of the things that the characters were saying were kind of cringy, and they made me feel like this book was written like earlier than it was actually published. Like this book was published in 2018, but it gave me like 2012 vibes. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but yeah, it was just a little bit cringy sometimes. I still thought that it was fun to read, but definitely it wasn't my favorite romance of all time. Then thankfully the next book that I read in January is actually one of those that immediately became a new favorite, and that book, or rather that webcomic, is actually Lore Olympus by Rachel Smith, or Smite. I'm not really sure how you're supposed to pronounce her last name. And basically this webcomic is a kind of like modern adaptation of the Greek myth of Persephone. And basically, in case you don't know about Persephone, in the classic Greek myth, she is this young girl who is kidnapped by Hades, and she basically becomes the goddess of the underworld. And I feel like at this point, if you've been following me here for a while, you know that I really love Greek mythology and Greek retellings, and this webcomic had actually been under my radar for such a long time, so I am so happy that I finally gave it a try. The romance is so wonderful. I honestly cried so many times while reading the comic because of how cute and absolutely wonderful they are. Like Hades and Persephone, they have my entire heart. I love them so much. I also love so many of the side characters. They're just so great, and their interactions with one another are sometimes so ridiculous because that's how Greek gods actually are. Like if you know a little bit about Greek mythology, you know that Greek gods are just so dramatic. I also really love the kind of like modern setting that we have in this series because it makes everything just so quirky and fun and kind of like unpredictable, because you're always wondering how she's going to adapt certain elements of the Greek myths into that modern setting, which I think is just so amazing. So yeah, it's funny, it's wound-worthy, it has so much angst between all of the characters, which I just really love. But also definitely be aware that it talks about some very dark themes like sexual assault and sexual harassment, so just know that before going into it if you want to try it out. But definitely it is one of my favorite things that I've read this year so far. I definitely feel like it's going to make my top 10 list. It's just so amazing, and it's kind of like living in my mind rent-free at the moment. I cannot stop thinking about Hades and Persephone. I love them so much. Then next I want to talk about two other graphic novels that I read this month, and I actually buddy read them with Hilary from Melted Books, and these two graphic novels were The Hidden Witch and The Midwinter Witch by Molly Ostertag. And basically, in case you don't know, these two are books 2 and 3 into the Witch Boy series, and that is a graphic novel series in which we follow Aster, our main character, whose family has this tradition of witchcraft and shape-shifting, and basically every single member of their family can master one of those two arts, but normally only girls can be witches and only boys can be shapeshifters. But Aster actually has a talent for witchcraft. So in the first volume, we actually follow him as he discovers his talent for witchcraft and kind of like challenges the standards in his family. And then in the second and third volumes, we follow him and his friends as they go on these wild magical adventures. And I just love this graphic novel series because it is just so wholesome and cozy. The illustrations are wonderful. They're all in full color also, which is just absolutely amazing. The magic system is simple but also tons of fun, and the characters are just so lovable. I love all of them and I want to protect them at all costs. So definitely reading those graphic novels is always a blast, especially since I'm buddy reading them with Hilary. Cannot wait for the next one. Then the next book that I read was The Lives of Saints by Leigh Bardugo, and this is basically a collection of stories relating the lives of saints from the Grishaverse, because in case you don't know, into the Grishaverse, one of the main religions is kind of like based around those saints who performed miracles and protect people. And I decided to read this one because, in case you don't know, which would really surprise me because I say it in almost every single video on this YouTube channel, I am doing my master's on Inej Gafa. I'm basically analyzing her as a character into the Six of Crows duology, and Inej is a very religious character, and so I wanted to read this book to get a better understanding of what her religion is and also what are the stories behind all of those saints that she prays to. And as I was expecting, those stories were very whimsical and sometimes funny, sometimes gory, which is what you can always expect from Leigh Bardugo, and this reading was definitely very enlightening. I will definitely be using this book for my research, so overall it was just great, and if you're a fan of the Grishaverse, I would highly recommend reading this book. Then the next book that I read was actually a reread for me, and that book was Bitterblue by Christine Cashore, which is the third book into the Graceling series. And in case you don't know, Christine from the other Christine That Reads, as well as I, decided to organize the Graceling along, during which we reread the entire Graceling series in preparation for the new book Winterkeep, which came out this month and I am definitely going to be talking about. But basically in Bitterblue, we follow Bitterblue, our main character, who is a young queen who is coming into her power after the terrible reign of her father, King Lek, who was a very tyrannical character. And basically we follow her as she is trying to understand what is going on exactly into her kingdom. We should probably call it a queendom, but this word was not really in use at the time this book was published. Basically, she is trying to uncover some mysteries and trying to understand her history, and it's just such a good book. It definitely has a lot of mystery and intrigue. It's whimsical. The plot always keeps me on the edge of my seat. The characters are just so lovable. You really root for them. Bitterblue as a main character is just so amazing, and I really love to see her grow throughout this novel and also throughout the entire series, and just everything about this book is absolutely wonderful. If you love court intrigue, if you love history and like trying to understand what happened in the past in order to heal and go on into the present, you will definitely enjoy this book and this entire series because it's just absolutely amazing, full of great feminist themes and great main female protagonists as well, and I just love it so much. Once again, a great reread. Then the next book that I read in January was Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And in this fantasy novel, we follow our main character Cassiopeia, who lives into this very small town in Mexico, and she is used by her mother's family and especially by her grandfather as a servant, and she is really treated badly, and that is until one day she accidentally wakes up the Mayan god of death, and basically she has to go with him on this wild adventure as he is trying to come back into his entire power because it was stolen by his brother. And I really enjoyed this book, but I was sadly also expecting a little bit more. I really love the setting of the book because it is set in Mexico during the 1920s, so during the like jazz age, and it was just very interesting to see what it was like in that period of time in Mexico. And and also I really loved that we got to like travel around a little bit as they were going on this quest. I also liked the main character Cassiopeia. She was a very interesting and strong female protagonist, but one thing that kind of disappointed me a little bit was the dynamic between her and the god of death, because the god of death, Hunkame, didn't really feel to me like a god, and I normally love those dynamics because of how complicated they are, because the god doesn't really understand the human and the human doesn't really understand the god, but I feel like it wasn't really executed in a way that was satisfying to me. So yeah, overall I enjoyed the story. I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought it was very interesting, but I was just expecting a little bit more. Then the next book that I read is also one of my new favorite books of all time, definitely one of my new favorite non-fiction book of all time, and that book is Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. In case you don't know, Audre Lorde is an activist and a scholar, and this book is basically a collection of her essays and some of her speeches, and in this one she really, I feel like, celebrates difference and how differences should actually help us understand the world better instead of pulling us apart. I loved how she talked about the intersection of sexism, homophobia, and racism in this book. I thought everything was just so well executed and well thought out. The balance between theory and also personal experience was also so well done, which is definitely something that I really love in nonfiction. It was very empowering, but it was also very critical of white feminism, which is definitely something that I feel that we really need right now. So definitely, if you want to learn more about feminism, about racism, please check out this book. It is just so good, and I will definitely be thinking about it for a very long time. Then the next book that I finished in January was Winterkeep by Kristen Cashore, and let me tell you, I don't think I've ever been that happy to finally receive a book in the mail. I literally opened up the package and started crying because I have been waiting for this book for so long. In case you don't know, this is the 4th installment into the Graceling Realm series, and I am just so happy that it is finally here. I honestly can't really believe that it's real, even if I finished it. And basically in this one we follow Bitterblue as she goes to the nation of Winterkeep, which is a new nation in this world that her country is trading with, and she goes over there because an envoy that she sent over to Winterkeep actually never came back, and she needs to go and investigate. And so we follow her and her friends, including some great cameos from the other books, as they go over there and try to see what is happening, until they slowly start to realize that the mystery is actually way bigger than they thought it was. And oh my gosh, how can I start talking about this book? I loved it so much. There is a new perspective in this one. We actually follow a male character, which never really happened into the Graceling original series, and he is just so incredibly delightful. I love him so much. Obviously, we also still had Bitterblue, whom I absolutely adore. She is definitely one of my favorite characters from this entire series. And we also had a new character called Lovisa, who is actually from Winterkeep. Also, this new world that we're discovering with the characters is absolutely whimsical and wonderful. There are like telepathic foxes, and there is this like big sea monster that lives at the bottom of the sea that everybody is like worshipping, and it's just so amazing. I loved it so much. The plot is great. There is so much action, so much yearning, so much romance. Like, one of the ships that I have been shipping since I was 14 years old finally sailed in this book. Let me tell you, there is nothing more satisfying. So yeah, I just absolutely love this book. It was everything I wanted and more, and I am so happy that I finally got to read it, and obviously it's now one of my favorites. And then finally, the last book that I read during the month of January was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This was actually our pick for the TWOCC Book Club for the month of January, and we had our live show already, so if you want to go and check that out, I will link it up here. And before I start talking about this book, I definitely want to mention that there are a lot of trigger warnings that apply to it, mainly suicide, depression, anxiety, and loss of a loved one, so definitely be aware aware of those things before going into it, because the first 25 pages are quite triggering. So if you're not ready for it, if you're not like in the right headspace for this, I would definitely not recommend. But basically in this book we follow our main character Nora, whose life is really not going in the direction that she wants it to. She has a lot of regrets. She is very, very sad and depressed, and she just doesn't want to live her life anymore. So one day she actually commits suicide, and while she is in between life and death, she goes into the Midnight Library. And in the Midnight Library there are an infinite number of books, and every single book tells the story of her life and what it would have looked like if she had made a different decision. The concept of this book really intrigued me, and it is definitely very hyped right now. A lot of people are reading it and absolutely loving it. For me, I think it was kind of like middle of the road, mainly because of the execution. I felt like some parts of the story were a little bit repetitive because we're going through all of Nora's lives with her. So, you know, some of the things kind of like repeat themselves depending on which life we're talking about. But also there were a lot of very beautiful and meaningful moments. And I also really loved some of the aspects of the representation of depression that we have in this book, because as someone who has struggled for a very long time with mental health issues, I definitely could relate to a lot of the things that Matt Haig was discussing in this book and how he was portraying them. Overall, I think that this is the kind of novel that if you really can relate to the character, it will probably really touch you and you will definitely really enjoy it because of that. But for me, some parts of it really worked and then some parts of it didn't really work. So I was kind of left kind of in the middle. Like, I don't think that it's a bad book, but it also didn't blow me away as much as I wanted it to. Some parts were also a little bit too preachy for my taste, almost as if they were like pulled out from a very generic self-help book, which is really not my style. I really don't love self-help books. But yeah, overall I thought it was a great story. I love the concept, just the execution wasn't always my cup of tea. Alright, so there y'all have it. That was my January wrap up. Overall, such a great reading month. I definitely read so many new favorites during this month and it was just so wonderful. In case you made it to the end of this video but you're not really sure what to comment, leave me a snowflake emoji into the comments because my window is currently completely covered in snow, so I'm really in the mood for that. So I hope that you really enjoyed this video. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe and I will see you in my next one. Bye!